Penn State misses out on one of their top priority targets at quarterback for the 2027 cycle, and to Michigan. Yeah, it's far out, but it is a big deal.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. You are locked on to Penn State football recruiting, and thank you so much for making this Locked On Crossover your first listen or watch of today. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of Locked On Nittany Lions, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. He is Brian Smith, the recruiting expert here with the Locked On Podcast Network, host of The Portal, talking all things transfer portal, but still primarily high school football recruiting. As 26 is getting ready to wrap up. Maybe not so much for Penn State. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things. AP poll, week 1, Penn State's easy non-conference schedule, why it's a good thing for the Nittany Lions in the scheme of it. The 2026 class for Penn State isn't done yet. We're going to focus on 2027, though, as Penn State is taking an early hit in recruiting and at quarterback, too. Quarterback is obviously the most important position in football. We know this, and we're going to talk about why it's so important to get a QB committed as soon as possible. Penn State was projected, it was a loose projection by 24/7, saying that, hey, they were going to wind up with Peter Bork. Oh, that would have been massive with, I know Keeman Spell's taking visits, but he's still committed. Khalil Taylor, Leighton Von Brandt. You have 3 top 50 prospects already committed. Another top 100 would have really set the foundation up for Penn State. You miss on Peter Bork, and you miss out to Michigan. So this stays within the Big Ten. It's a big deal because this is your top target, but you also lose a quarterback to a Big Ten foe. And as more quarterback dominoes fall, that's why you got to get a QB committed ASAP, because you don't want to miss out on the top tier prospects.
Yeah, right now, if you look at the Midwest powers, Michigan, Ohio State, and Notre Dame all have a quarterback committed. So that's good for Penn State in one part. But I believe like 3 out of the 5 or 6 kids they've offered are those players. Yeah. So they don't have to worry about competing with them anymore. But now you need to make sure that you go out and you get whatever your second group of players are, get those kids offered. Maybe you get 1 or your 2 guys that you've offered that haven't committed back on campus soon, but it is getting a little bit more important to get this done. And man, recruiting has just sped up so much. These kids haven't even played a down of their junior year yet.
Yeah.
But you got kids coming off the board, and quarterback, you usually know pretty early who's got the arm talent. So it's going to be interesting to see which kids come to campus early this fall to Happy Valley, or if they go to the whiteout game or whatever. Pay close attention to that, because Penn State's probably going to be looking to make it a kid commit sooner rather than later.
And I say that they absolutely need it, because if you look back at 2025, 2026, they didn't get their first choice at QB. I know they're going up against Texas, but Diabell was their first choice in 2026. They didn't get any of their first or second or third choices. I'm sorry. I like Beckham-Kritz's upside, but that certainly was not Penn State's first choice in the 2025 class when it came to quarterback prospects. That's honest. That's a fact. So Penn State's really in a spot where for 2027, you need one of these first 5 QBs that they've offered. They've only offered 5 quarterbacks to this point. Brady Edmonds, who's committed to Ohio State, Peter Bork, who's now committed to Michigan, and somebody that Penn State at least was projected to have a good attempt at landing. That didn't happen. Peyton Houston, out of the state of Louisiana. The Rivals projection has USC as the projected landing spot. We'll see how that unfolds. Keegan Croucher, who we're going to talk about more here, and Teddy Gerard, who ultimately committed to Notre Dame not too long ago. Brian, why does this keep happening? Because you have Drew Aller. Drew Aller is in talks to be the number 1 overall pick at almost a guarantee. And I don't like to use that word, but he seems to be guaranteed to be a first-round selection in next year's NFL draft. Yet more quarterbacks that are at that top tier aren't interested in Penn State. So is Drew Aller not doing enough? Is it we need to see it in order to believe it? He actually has to be selected in the first round for the dominoes to start falling. So what's going on here with Penn State not getting their first or sometimes even their second choice at QB?
Probably a combination of events. Part of it is who kids grew up rooting for. Part of it is the recruiting visit may just went better at another school. And part of it, I think, is the wide receiver room at Penn State here lately hasn't been that exciting. That last part has hurt a bunch of schools over the years. So they just need to join that fray. Like outside of Ohio State, like even Georgia usually struggles to get quarterbacks. Georgia. So there's only a handful of schools that the QBs really like. Ohio State is by far the most popular.
Surprising.
LSU to a certain degree. Texas, I mean, I get like Ohio State. If I was a quarterback, I get it. I get it. There aren't very many. So Penn State is in that next tier, and they've had a little bit of bad luck. But at the same time, it's not like they're recruiting a bunch of stiffs either. Like Grunkmeyer and some of these guys are pretty good. It would be nice to get the next five-star guy, kind of like a Drew Aller, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. So we'll see if they can keep plugging away. And there's a long, long way to go in the 27 class. We're not even done with 26. So I'm not feeling too bad about their chances yet.
Well, that's why I point specifically to 25-26 and that you can't go 0 for 3 in 2027. That's my point here. And with the way that quarterbacks set the tone for recruiting classes now, whether it has to do with NIL and the transfer portal, I think that's what it primarily has to do with. The fact that NIL and transfer portal have changed the landscape of college football. You have to get your QB. You have to go get your QB target sooner rather than later. So in the scheme of things for Penn State, is it okay that they've missed out on a few of their priority targets? Yes, if you can recover, but I don't want to see them to go in a situation where, and I like Troy Hune a lot in 2026, but again, it's not that I don't know. I do know that he was not their first QB choice. They pushed for Diabell. They liked Diabell, and I get it. Shoot for the stars, because ultimately you'll hit the moon if you don't reach the stars, right? But the fact of the matter is, from my point of view, is that, yeah, you did get Grunkmeyer in 2024, and that's good. You continued that trend with Drew Aller. But at some point, that string of quarterbacks is going to end if you go 0 for 3 in this 2027 cycle.
Yeah, sometimes it's just tough, man. I don't know if they have somebody that would be next on their board. Definitely, is it Croucher?
Keegan
or
Croucher.
Who is it?
Keegan Croucher.
Okay. I mean, I've seen him play, and he's a pretty good player. I saw him at the Under Armour Future 50 event. He's got a frame that can fill out, etc. They took him. I think they would be fine. Yeah. I don't know where else he's really looking, but he's a Northeast kid. And again, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Michigan are already done. They should have a pretty good, I mean, I would be a little disappointed if Penn State went all in on him and they didn't get him. Then I would start to raise awareness. Yeah. That's how I would look at it, because no offense, I know they've been better, but like Syracuse doesn't move the needle in terms of cachet. And that's probably, I'm guessing, their biggest competition for a Northeast kid remaining.
Regionally, but nationally, ironically enough, Keegan Croucher's recruitment has sped up because another quarterback is. So you see what I'm saying here when I point to, it's not a big deal. 2027, there's so much more time. There's really not when it comes to quarterbacks, because now Bork is off the board. Now everybody's attention has shifted to the next QB, the next man up mentality, truly. And Keegan Croucher's recruitment has accelerated here. He has the top 3. Ole Miss, Oregon, and Penn State. Great.
It's a weird list.
Penn State has not done well when it comes to recruiting against Oregon in these head-to-head battles. They lose every single time. So I don't like this. If this was Penn State and Ole Miss, I'd say, okay, this is a toss-up. You know, Ole Miss is SEC country. I'd be a little concerned about that. But as you said, hey, you've seen Croucher in person. If they can't get Bork, well, it's not like it's a consolation to get Keegan Croucher. There's not much that separates them. So you're going to have to fend off the likes of Oregon and Ole Miss in this recruitment to get your premier quarterback in the class of 2027. Again, because you need one. You need a premier quarterback in this class.
I wonder if they go more all in with the NIL or something, but it's so early. And I really didn't speak to the young man at the event. I just watched him, so I don't know what makes him tick. But Oregon is always the fly in the ointment. They're impossible to predict because they do 98% of the recruiting out of state.
Yeah.
And they've got cachet. They're probably the most popular team with recruits in the country. Like every kid wants to at least visit Oregon. So and before anybody asks, yes, it's the uniforms. It's that important. Kids love it. Like, you can laugh if you're an old school alum or something. It matters a lot. So Oregon is the hip school, and a lot of kids want to at least go out there and visit, and their NIL is insane. So I get it.
Croucher's an industry top 10 quarterback. He goes to Cheshire Academy in New York. He's an industry 4-star. He's just outside of the top 100. This is the player that Penn State, I think, needs. Or it's not really too much of a pivot, but can you land a Peyton Houston? I see that one is very unlikely with schools like USC or Texas involved in this recruitment. This will continue to play out, but again, you got to get a quarterback now, or again, you're going to have to go to your second, potentially your third or your fourth option. I'm just saying you can't get swept. You can't go 3 years in a row without getting a premier priority target like this. So wait and see, but Penn State can recover if they get a player like Croucher. If not, then like you said, the red flags go up, the alerts go up because Penn State didn't get another premier QB. Back to the 2026 class. Penn State is not finished. And when we say that, they are trying to flip a prospect that is an under-the-radar defensive lineman. We're going to tell you about him and what Penn State's odds are for landing him, plus some of the other underrated prospects that are already committed to the Nittany Lions. That is coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. And this episode is brought to you by DripDrop. When I'm on top of my hydration, I notice everything is working better. My energy, my mood, my focus. But getting enough fluids every day isn't always the easiest. That's why I've been loving DripDrop. DripDrop is doctor developed and scientifically proven for faster hydration. It uses the perfect balance of sodium electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of a leading sports drink. And I've tried DripDrop for myself, and I gotta say, it has lived up to the hype. I got the 0 sugar citrus variety pack, and you don't notice the difference. The taste is still there, the flavor is still there, and I like some variety, trying all the different flavors, the true citrus, orange, lemonade, pink lemonade, all of those different flavors to have that variety. So DripDrop has certainly been worth it. And I do notice that increase in mood, in energy. And right now, DripDrop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head over to DripDrop.com. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege. That's DripDrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONCollege for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard. Penn State's not finished with the class of 2026. And Brian, we talked about this. They were going to try to flip players. Now, of course, some long shots, obviously, like a Luke Wafel, for example, or they're never going to give up on the likes of a Kari Adams or a Joey O'Brien. But we're not here to talk about those prospects in particular. No, one that Penn State is actually a little more likely to flip if things work out. He's a defensive tackle. This guy, 6'2", 290 pounds, honestly reminds me a little bit of Zane Durant. I know that's high praise because Zane Durant's being dubbed as an All-America preseason selection here, but Keetron Harris out of the state of Arizona, who is committed to Arizona. This was recently reported by On3 and Steve Wiltfong that Penn State's trying to make this happen. Penn State is trying to push for this, and it sounds like there's at least conversations happening between Penn State and Harris. With the way that defensive line has gone this cycle for Penn State, this is a must. This is a huge win. You might look at and Brian, I talked about this. I said, Penn State might as well not even try because the rivals projection says that Georgia is most likely to. He's committed to Arizona, but there's a 60% chance that he ends up with Georgia. And you just said that's not happening. So Penn State does have a legitimate shot here.
I would assume so. And for those who don't know, Georgia's got 8 D linemen committed. At some point.
That many? Only that many?
I mean, it's insane. Yeah. So I highly doubt he's going to UGA unless there's something I don't know about. So we'll see what happens with that. But Penn State needs more size in the middle. It's a topic that Zach and I have discussed multiple times. Joining his show. And this kid's got raw tools. I watched a little of his film. I mean, he's nowhere near ready yet technically, like most kids. But he's got the frame you're looking for to play 3 tech or 1 tech. in the Big Ten. So 280, 290, something like that, somewhere in that range just by watching his film. This is the kind of guy that if you take him and you develop him, Penn State's done an incredible job with that up front, especially on the D-line over the last 5 to 7 years. Every year they got somebody new that nobody really knew about that was a 3-star that ends up being a major contributor. Not necessarily always NFL guy, but at least a really good college player. And several do get to the NFL. So I would imagine it's pretty attractive. Let's see what happens with him. But he's committed to Arizona, if I remember correctly. And, that's closer to home, but that's not a very good football program. So let's see how this season goes for the Wildcats and see if Penn State can get him back on campus and see where it goes.
And I like what Penn State has at defensive line. Don't get me wrong. We've raved about how Isaac Chukara was somebody that was completely under the radar, didn't even have a recruiting profile, and then started to take off as showing up at a regional for the All-22. It's the equivalent to the Elite 11 for skilled positions, and did win an MVP there. I like Alex Haskell a lot. They got a few defensive ends committed, but like I said, for the most part, they've missed out on some of those priority targets originally. It just helps out. And may I point out that Zane Durant was a 3-star when he was a prospect, and look what he's become over the course of his time at Penn State. And presently, we're talking about a player like Chaz Coleman, who was a lower end 4-star defensive end out of the state of Ohio. Later on in the cycle, really took off in his recruitment. And now this is a player that might contribute sooner rather than later as a true freshman. So just because you see, oh, this is a 3-star again, if Penn State wants a player, a prospect, they know what they're doing. I'm going to trust that Dion Barnes has been right. He's been successful with a lot of defensive linemen in his short time as a defensive line coach, the full-time defensive line coach for Penn State. So if he sees a player that he likes, I'm going to trust his judgment.
That's the best evaluation, is seeing kids live at a camp, seeing somebody that you knew that you might be interested in, but you wanted to see his height and weight, talk to him, get a better feel for if he'd be a fit for your program. Mm-hmm. That's what most colleges want, especially at quarterback, because they're the face of their program. But guys that are, shall we say, up-and-comers, that don't have a bunch of offers, they really want to see those kids. It gets into the personality traits, who's around them, what's their camp like, and then finally, do we think this kid's got a lot of room to grow, or is he already maxed out? All those things are really much better to evaluate in person.
Now let's talk about the 2026 class as a whole for Penn State. Brian, there are plenty of prospects that are underrated in this group, and I don't think there's necessarily a wrong answer. I think a lot of players we are going to see actually jump up in the recruiting rankings. Chukara, for example, Haskell, top prospect that's committed. Kevin Brown, I think, will ultimately be a 5-star. So anyone in particular that we've had this conversation before, but now as we get very close to the kickoff of the high school season, is there somebody that you're keeping tabs on? My go-to is Jasir Rogers at that wide receiver spot, because you gave him the due respect and put him as one of your top slot receivers in the entire country. The industry says that he's a 3-star. He's your average 3-star. That's certainly not the case there. So I will always default to Jasir Rogers as someone that I'm excited to see continue to develop during his time in high school. Any other players that immediately come to mind here for Penn State?
Any of the kids from those states like Rhode Island, Delaware, Connecticut, nobody's going to see those kids live.
Yeah.
That are in my industry. They're just not.
Yeah.
So there's only a handful of guys that live in the Northeast that travel around, and a couple do, but like, are they really going to go to Rhode Island or Delaware to see a kid just annihilate everybody? Probably not. New Jersey, Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC, those are the cities where they go. So occasionally you might go to Pittsburgh. I would imagine Penn State's got 2 or 3 guys that are underrated just based on where they play. And there's really no way around it. So
Delaware.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Chukara.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like those kids, it's super hard to evaluate. I had this conversation the other day. Of all people, you know who was incredibly difficult to evaluate? Arch Manning. He played at a 2A high school in Louisiana. He didn't play against anybody.
Yeah.
So it was impossible to really grade him, and like nobody wanted to go see him play because competition was terrible. It's the same thing. So you got to trust the coaches on this one and not worry about the star ranking when kids are from obscure places. Kid comes from Canada or prep school in the Northeast or something, Delaware. You just got to trust the coaches at any program that makes a scholarship offer.
Well, and when they're actually on college campus, on a college campus, those star rankings go completely out the window. So,
That's right.
again, I will default to Penn State's judgment, their scouting, their recruiting. If they want to prospect and they get them to commit, there's a reason. Again, I think some people maybe don't realize that Penn State needs to accept the commitment. There's a lot of times where a prospect might say, hey, I want to be here. I want to be a Nittany Lion, but you never hear about it. It's not going to go be a headline at the end of the day. But there are instances, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about them, where a player or a prospect is like, hey, I want to be at school ABC. And they're like, why don't you hold off on your commitment? We'll have you back for a couple more training camps.
That's pretty common. Like, you want to see those kids.
And it's not talked about.
Yeah, it's pretty common. You want to see those kids. So I always look at it when you hear that, like, so-and-so's coming to campus, and then people say, oh, he must not have been any good. He didn't get an offer. No, it's not necessarily the case, but at least the coaches and the players, hopefully parents or whoever comes with them, they get a better idea. Mm-hmm. So I don't put a lot of stock in that either. Every coaching staff looks at it differently. Yeah. And I find it funny, a lot of fans try to compare what the coaches do compared to a recruiting service. And I've worked for some of them. I get it. But coaches look at it really different. The cultural standpoint, et cetera. Most recruiting rankings and whatnot, it's just about the talent. Does it mean that you're going to fit into Penn State or to Syracuse or Ohio State or whatever? No. So that's why these things are very, very fluid.
All right, we'll dial it back even further into the present. AP poll was released. Week 1, Nevada's not enticing. Penn State's a 45-plus point favorite. Okay, it's an easy non-conference schedule that will be an absolute cakewalk. But for Penn State, things actually set up pretty well, pretty strategically. We're going to talk about why the non-conference schedule actually really helps Penn State this season. That's coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. And this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. And with the money you save on tickets, you can now splurge on food, drinks, merchandise, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes it possible. Gametime makes buying tickets fast and simple. And get this, prices on the app will actually drop as it gets closer to game time. First pitch, they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. And tickets for Penn State football games are up on Gametime. That is right. If you're looking for Penn State football tickets, you can go to Gametime. And this is where the clear seat views really help out. Because if you've never been to Beaver Stadium, if you've never been to a specific venue, having that clear seat view ahead of time so you know your point of view, then you're not second-guessing yourself about your seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Brian, we'll start with the AP poll. The preseason rankings actually matter. These early rankings, I know when the dust settles and we get through the halfway point of the season, we'll have maybe not necessarily another Florida State emerge. And I'm sorry about that. I know you also do Locked On Seminoles, but we're not going to see a total just an absolute downfall where people don't, that they're completely, where the AP voters were completely wrong. But the AP poll does matter because when you look at the resume long-term, if you're able, this is for anybody, not even just Penn State, if you're able to pick up a ranked win early in the season, at one point in time, they were ranked. And I don't believe that, well, this is something that's pointed out a lot too. USC, when I say that USC was an important win for Penn State, well, USC was awful by the end of the season. Maybe they weren't necessarily awful, but they definitely took a significant step backwards. Penn State ended their season. Penn State ended USC's season, and that was a completely different team that was building for 2025. So the team that they were in week 12, week 13, that was a completely different USC team that they beat in, I guess, week 6 or week 7. I'm kind of losing, my memory there on that. And specifically, my point is that Penn State beat a quality team at the time. So rankings do matter. Penn State being number 2 is a big deal, and being 5 voting points away from Texas, I don't look at it as, oh, Penn State's definitely number 2. No, this was a 1A, 1B situation where Texas had 25 first place votes. Penn State had 23. Ohio State had 11. So there's not really much of a gap between Texas and Penn State. There's a little bit of a gap between the Nittany Lions and the Buckeyes. That I find interesting. The AP voters are buying into the hype around Penn State.
They have, and I think a lot of people have done so. There's several different people that think Penn State will at least make the Final Four again. Several think they'll win it. And I think that's just good fodder for recruiting. I think it's good for the program, obviously the fans, and good for Penn State. But just as a note, some of the polls are pretty wild, and the AP still has its gap. Did you know somebody voted UNLV number 12? Like, it's just –
Hey, more power to Dan Mullen, am I right?
Good for him, but like – so I always take it with a grain of salt. But like this year, there's about 8 teams. Then there's a couple on the fringe, like LSU, Miami, Arizona State, Kansas State, Ole Miss, etc., Illinois. But there's about 8 teams, and they've just depending on which poll you look at, it's the same ones. We all know who they are, and they all got a ton of votes. This was one of the broadest votes in terms of somebody getting a first place vote, but still at the top, it was Texas and Penn State. So congrats to the Nittany Lions.
Do you have any issue with the fact that the SEC has, because you are a neutral, you offer a neutral perspective in this case. SEC has 10 teams, the Big Ten has 6. It's obviously oversaturated with the SEC, but it continues to add fuel to the fire unnecessarily. And I could have articulated this better in the Big Ten squad show I had done recently. But this, like I said, it literally only adds fuel to the fire. For the SEC is the best conference. The AP voters, put a lot of them in the top 25, and it's just you got to prove it. You have to prove it at the end of the day. So the preseason rankings, they're valuable when it comes to the resume, but it also has a negative inverse effect when we have this debate about who's the better conference, the Big Ten or the SEC. Well, yeah, when you add all these teams into a poll that we don't know how things are going to settle just yet, that's the issue that I think people point to when they say SEC bias.
The SEC is the deepest league, like the middle of their league. But here's the funny part. Living in the South, when the SEC was on top, they always used to say, the fans, at least that I knew, we're the best league because we got the teams that win the titles. Now that they haven't won the title the last couple of years, it's all of a sudden about the depth.
Yeah. It's
amazing how that works. Now, full disclosure, if the roles were reversed, Big Ten fans would do the same thing because everybody's biased.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't care either way. But if I was looking at it from a top-heavy perspective, I would give the edge to the Big Ten for the following reason. This will probably tick off a lot of SEC people, but this is my area. The kids that get recruited to the Big Ten overall, there's a lot more culture fits. There are fewer mercenaries. That's been the problem in the SEC, and that's why they're getting killed in bowl games. They got kids going to schools for paychecks. They check out at the end of the year if they're not in the playoff. Too many of those teams. Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, like Illinois, I think, has got a tremendous culture. Those teams are going to play hard year in, year out. And I think like Illinois is one of my picks. They might make the playoff this year. That's the difference right now at the top. Now, if you want to talk depth, it's definitely the SEC. That's how I would look at it. Now, I'm not trying to pick on like Minnesota or Iowa, but I'll still take Oklahoma and Ole Miss. You know what I mean? Like Texas A&M. Those schools, I think, would do better in the middle than the Big Ten schools. But at the top, it's the Big Ten.
That's why I think we need to play it. A result for result type of Big Ten SEC crossover where the number 1 team in the SEC plays the number 1 team in the Big Ten, the worst team in the SEC plays the worst team in the Big Ten, and actually settle it. But teams change so much, especially in college from season to season. But I digress from that. Let's briefly talk about Penn State's non-conference schedule as we wrap things up here, Brian. It's easy. There's no way going around it. And everyone points to Indiana, I think, because they're canceling games, but Penn State is guilty of this too here. From a strategy point, it's it's this instance. Penn State's scheduling. I know I'm going to mention Syracuse here, but at least they're getting another Power 4 school in the mix in the not too distant future. So this is a temporary type of situation where Penn State's going to play a cupcake schedule. But when we're actually evaluating it for what it is, you might dunk on it, you might criticize it, that's fine. But for Penn State, this build up to one of the most important games of the season going into Oregon, this is massive. You want to be well rested. You essentially have a preseason to shake off a little bit of rust. You're not necessarily going to be battle tested, but Oregon might be beaten up, battered, bruised, and they're going to go across the country into Beaver Stadium. It just gives Penn State, I think, an upper hand here when going into one of the biggest games. It's the second biggest game on the schedule aside from Ohio State. I
don't remember who Oregon plays the week before, but
Oklahoma State, Northwestern, and Oregon State in that order, and no bye week. Penn State gets a bye week after the non-conference schedule. It's almost not fair.
That is a pretty wild stretch. I mean,
yeah,
Oregon's a really talented team, but they've got a lot of newness, especially in their secondary. Mm-hmm. They did get Thieneman from Purdue, but I think he's somewhat overrated. I watched some of his film, like the Notre Dame game and a few others. He struggled. He's just a good athlete. I'm sure he'll get better coaching at Oregon, but they've got a new quarterback. There's a lot of questions there, but they're going to, like, their line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball could match Penn State all day. That's where the game is interesting. I assume that Dante's going to be the quarterback for Oregon. We'll see. Yeah. But I haven't heard anything official unless I missed it. That's the other part. Like, we're still in the point where a lot of teams haven't announced their quarterback and coaches are trying to be coy. I get it. I have no idea what to think of Oregon. They could be an 8-4 team or they could be an 11-1 team. If the quarterback ain't right, that's iffy. And at least you know what you're getting with Drew Auer. He's going to be above average pretty much every weekend. And they got better receivers this year too. I know they lose a stud tight end, but they're going to be one of the better offenses in college football because the O-line's predominantly back too. So Oregon, if they come in beat up, that's going to be rough.
He is Brian Smith, the recruiting expert here with the Locked On Podcast Network, and does a variety of other different coverage. But go check out his work over at the portal, Locked On Seminoles, and so much more. My name is Zach Seyko, your host of Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily source for all things Penn State. Give our channels a follow, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and wherever you get your podcasts, become an everydayer. Thank you so much for checking out this crossover episode. Brian, recruiting never slows down truly, so I'm glad we got to hit on it one final time, and I'm sure before the season starts here, but I'm sure we'll be talking about Penn State recruiting a little more as the season progresses leading up to signing day. So can't wait to have more of those conversations.
Absolutely. Recruiting never sleeps.